step quietly into a world long past a world where battles were fought not only with courage and strategy, but with tools of war so strange, so inventive, that they can seem almost unbelievable to us today. The medieval battlefield was not just a place of swords clashing and arrows flying. It was a stage for human ingenuity, where armor-piercing spikes, swinging chains, and bizarre contraptions were crafted to turn the tide of war. In this journey, we will explore weapons that are as fascinating as they are deadly. Some were forged from necessity, others from sheer imagination. Some inspired fear even before a battle began. Each has a story to tell, a story of craftsmanship, strategy, and the strange ways humans sought to gain an advantage over their enemies. Draw near and witness the peculiar, the terrifying, and the ingenious world of medieval warfare. This is not just a history of battles, it is a history of the weapons that shaped them. The flail. From farm tool to fearsome weapon. In the quiet fields of medieval Europe, farmers swung a simple implement called a flail, using it to thresh grain, separating the chaff from the wheat. It was a tool of harvest, humble and practical, designed for rhythm and efficiency rather than destruction. Yet, on the battlefield, this same implementation took on a far more terrifying purpose. The flail, transformed into a weapon of war, became an instrument capable of delivering devastating blows, its swinging chain and heavy head turning an ordinary soldier into a formidable opponent. The design of the flail as a weapon is deceptively simple. It typically consists of a wooden handle, often a foot or more in length, connected by a short chain to a spiked or weighted metal head. The chain allowed the head to gain momentum in a swinging arc, striking with a force that could crush armor, splinter shields, or shatter bones. Unlike a sword, which required precision and a direct line to the target, the flail could strike over or around an enemy's defenses, bypassing traditional guard techniques. Its unpredictability made it feared on the battlefield, but also difficult to control. A poorly wielded flail could strike the user as easily as the opponent, a fact recorded in several medieval treatises on combat. Historical accounts suggest that the flail was particularly favored by foot soldiers who faced heavily armored cavalry. Knights in full-plate armor could shrug off blows from ordinary swords and axes. But the swinging momentum of a flail could transfer kinetic energy through metal plates, causing concussive damage even without breaking the armor. Chroniclers of the time described the impact of such weapons as both physically and psychologically devastating. A single well-aimed swing could incapacitate a mounted knight, sending horse and rider crashing to the ground. Despite its fearsome reputation, the flail was not universally adopted across Europe. Its use was more common in certain regions, such as the Germanic states and parts of Eastern Europe, where foot soldiers were a crucial part of army formations. There are surviving illustrations from manuscripts and combat treatises showing soldiers practicing with flails, emphasizing control and precision. These depictions reveal that, although often imagined as a chaotic swinging weapon of pure destruction, effective use of a flail required skill, timing, and a deep understanding of leverage. The flail also inspired variations designed for specific combat purposes. Some featured multiple heads, chained together like a small cluster of hammers, increasing the chance of a strike landing on a target. Others were heavier, intended for siege work, capable of breaking down doors or gates when swung by multiple soldiers in unison. There are even reports of flails with metal spikes so long that they could hook an opponent's armor or even a shield, pulling it away from its protective stance. Such adaptations illustrate the creativity of medieval weaponsmiths, who were constantly experimenting to give their soldiers any possible advantage in the chaos of war. Yet, the flail was as much a weapon of intimidation as it was a tool of killing. The sight of a soldier wielding one chain thrashing, spiked head glinting in sunlight, could cause hesitation in even the most disciplined opponents. In a time when psychological warfare was as crucial as physical skill, such fear could tip the balance of a skirmish. Soldiers often painted or decorated the heads of their flails, adding grotesque faces or spikes shaped to mimic teeth, enhancing the effect on those who saw them approaching. By the late Middle Ages, the flail began to decline in popularity, overshadowed by the increasing use of polearms and firearms, which were more effective at piercing armor and reaching enemies at a distance. Yet the image of the flail endures, preserved in manuscripts, tapestries, and modern imagination, as one of the strangest and most iconic weapons of medieval warfare. It stands as a reminder that ingenuity often emerges from necessity, and that even the simplest tools, when adapted for battle, can become instruments of fear and destruction. In the fields, the flail separated grain from chaff. On the battlefield, it separated the living from the fallen. Its story reflects the dual nature of medieval life, the thin line between daily survival and the relentless march of war, where even a humble farmer's tool could be transformed into a symbol of lethal ingenuity. The Morning Star. Spiked elegance. In the dim light of a medieval armory, a weapon hung quietly among swords and axes, its simple appearance belying the violence it could unleash. The Morning Star. Unlike the flail, which evolved from humble agricultural origins, the Morning Star was designed from the start for the battlefield, a marriage of elegance and lethality. Its distinguishing feature was its head, a sphere of iron or steel, often studded with spikes, mounted atop a solid wooden or metal shaft. Though its design seems straightforward, every detail of the Morning Star reflected centuries of practical experience in the art of war. The Morning Star's purpose was singular but effective: to deliver concussive, piercing blows capable of damaging armor and injuring heavily protected opponents. In an era where plate and chainmail offered formidable protection, conventional swords or maces sometimes failed to incapacitate armored knights. The spiked head of the Morning Star concentrated force on small points, increasing the likelihood of puncturing or denting armor and delivering a painful impact. Unlike blunt maces, which could bruise and stun, the Morning Star could break bones beneath the protection of metal, making it a favored weapon in close-quarter combat. Several variations of the Morning Star existed, ranging from compact, one-handed versions suitable for infantrymen to longer, two-handed designs wielded with both strength and precision. Some carried long, slender spikes intended to pierce chainmail rings. Others bore broader, shorter spikes to deliver maximum blunt trauma alongside puncture capability. The versatility of the weapon made it suitable for both foot soldiers and mounted combatants, though wielding it effectively required careful training. A poorly executed swing could leave the wielder off balance or expose them to a counterattack. A risk, recognized and recorded by medieval combat manuals. Historical illustrations and surviving artifacts reveal the Morning Star's prominence across Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. Chroniclers recount instances where it was used to devastating effect in sieges and pitched battles alike. Its presence in urban warfare is also notable. Within narrow streets and fortified gates, the Morning Star's compact yet powerful design allowed soldiers to strike around shields and through the defenses of doorways and barricades. Unlike the sword, which relied on thrusts and slashes in open combat, the Morning Star excelled in the confined spaces where brute force and precision collided. Beyond its functional design, the Morning Star carried psychological weight. Spikes glinting in torchlight or sunlight could intimidate the enemy before combat even began. Medieval warfare was as much about fear as force, and a weapon that appeared simultaneously refined and deadly contributed to the mental strain imposed on opponents. Some Morning Stars were deliberately ornate, with engraved shafts or decorated heads, blending artistry with menace, a reminder that in medieval society, status, craftsmanship, and martial prowess were often intertwined. The Morning Star was sometimes confused with the flail in popular imagination, but the two were distinct. The flail relied on a flexible chain for swinging momentum, whereas the Morning Star's rigid shaft allowed for precise strikes, controlled swings, and predictable force. This made it both safer for the user and more effective in certain tactical situations, particularly against armored foes. While cinematic depictions often exaggerate the weapon's destructiveness, Surviving examples and written accounts suggest a balance between lethality, control, and the wielder's skill. Its decline in popularity, like many medieval weapons, came with the rise of ranged firearms and changes in armor design. Plate armor became more articulated and resilient, reducing the Morning Star's ability to puncture or concuss effectively. Yet, its impact on the development of close combat weaponry was significant. It exemplifies the medieval emphasis on versatility, precision, and intimidation qualities that informed the design of many subsequent weapons. Ultimately, the Morning Star stands as a symbol of the medieval mind, a combination of practicality and artistry, function and fear. Each spike, each polished head, and each carefully balanced shaft was the product of observation, experimentation, and the relentless drive to survive and dominate in an age of constant conflict. In its elegance and brutality, the Morning Star reminds us that even in the harsh reality of war, craftsmanship and ingenuity shape the instruments of destruction. Polearms, spears, halberds, and the unusual guisarmes. In the vast, open fields of medieval Europe, where armies clashed in tight formations or extended lines, the polearm reigned supreme. Unlike swords or axes, which required close proximity and individual skill, polearms extended the reach of a soldier, turning a single man into a formidable force capable of controlling space, disrupting cavalry, and piercing armor from a safer distance. These weapons were among the most varied of the medieval arsenal, ranging from simple spears to complex and unusual designs like the guisarme, each reflecting both practical battlefield needs and inventive experimentation. At their most basic, polearms were long shafts typically wooden, often reinforced with metal tipped with a blade, spike, or hook. Spears, the simplest form, were widespread across Europe, valued for their versatility and ease of use. A spear could be thrust, thrown, or used to create defensive formations such as the shield wall. Heavily armored knights could be repelled by well-disciplined infantry wielding spears in dense, overlapping lines. In some battles, the simple spear, wielded by common soldiers, proved far more decisive than a collection of swords or maces, a testament to the power of reach, timing, and collective coordination. The halberd represented a more sophisticated evolution of the polearm. Emerging in the 14th and 15th centuries, it combined multiple functions into a single weapon: an axe blade for cleaving, a spike for thrusting, and a hook for pulling mounted opponents from horseback. This combination allowed a single soldier to adapt to multiple threats, whether striking infantry, piercing armor, or unseating a knight. The halberd's design reflected careful observation of battlefield needs. It was both a weapon of offense and a tool of control, enabling disciplined infantry to challenge heavily armored cavalry that had previously dominated European battlefields. Among the more unusual designs was the guisarme, a polearm characterized by its curved blade or hook mounted on a long shaft. While some polearms were straightforward in purpose, the guisarme was designed for creative utility. The hook could pull riders from horses, snag an opponent's shield, or manipulate armor to create openings for follow-up attacks. Some variations included a combination of spike, hook, and small axe-like blade, demonstrating a willingness among medieval weaponsmiths to experiment with hybrid designs. Though not as widely used as spears or halberds, guisarmes appear in numerous illuminated manuscripts and combat manuals, suggesting their role in specialized situations, especially during sieges or close-quarters engagements. Polearms were not merely offensive tools. They were essential for maintaining formation and defense. Infantry formations relied on the extended reach of these weapons to keep cavalry at bay and to protect flanks. The effectiveness of the polearm in formation warfare is evident in battles such as Courtrai, 1302, where Flemish infantry, armed largely with spears and other polearms, successfully resisted and routed French knights. The combination of long reach, disciplined use, and the psychological intimidation of facing a forest of spear points made polearms central to medieval tactics. Their popularity also stemmed from accessibility. While swords required extensive training and could be prohibitively expensive, Polearms were relatively inexpensive to produce and straightforward to wield with basic instruction. This democratization of combat meant that even common foot soldiers could pose a credible threat to the elite knight, reshaping the social and tactical landscape of warfare. In this sense, polearms were instruments of both innovation and social transformation, empowering infantry in a world long dominated by mounted nobility. Despite their prevalence, polearms were not without limitations. Their length made them cumbersome in tight spaces or heavily wooded terrain, and their effectiveness depended on disciplined use in formation. A lone infantryman wielding a halberd against a mobile cavalry unit would quickly find himself at a disadvantage. Yet in the open field, in sieges, or in well-coordinated defensive positions, polearms proved remarkably versatile. From the simplest spear to the complex gazarm, these weapons illustrate the medieval commitment to innovation, adaptability, and strategic ingenuity. Each design reflects careful thought about the realities of war, the need for reach, the challenge of armor, the threat of cavalry, and the importance of disciplined formations. Polearms, in their diversity and effectiveness, offer a window into the ingenuity of medieval minds and the subtle sophistication of warfare that went far beyond the clash of swords and the flight of arrows. The man-catcher and other anti-cavalry weapons. In the midst of a medieval battlefield, one of the greatest threats to infantry was the mounted knight, heavily armored, highly mobile, and often armed with long lances designed to impale and unseat. A cavalry charge could decimate unprepared foot soldiers. In response, medieval armies developed a variety of specialized anti-cavalry weapons tools, intended not merely to wound, but to neutralize the devastating advantage of mounted combat. Among the most unusual of these was the man-cather, a weapon designed to capture rather than kill, and yet no less deadly in its ingenuity. The man-cather, sometimes called a man-catcher, consisted of a long pole with a large, metal, semicircular claw, or jaws, at its end. Its primary function was to ensnare a rider, either by trapping the torso or limbs, and bring them safely, or at least in a controlled manner, to the ground. The jaws could close around a knight, pulling him off his horse without necessarily piercing the armor or striking with lethal force. While it might seem ceremonial or oddly impractical to the modern eye, the man-cather reflects a clear medieval logic, controlling the enemy without excessive bloodshed, particularly in situations such as capturing nobles for ransom, which was a common and highly lucrative practice. Beyond the man-cather, other anti-cavalry tools took forms both practical and imaginative. The cheval de frise, for example, consisted of rows of sharpened stakes or spears planted in the ground to impede horses. Horses, unaccustomed to sharp obstacles underfoot, would refuse to charge or could be fatally impaled if the formation was dense enough. Similarly, spike barricades or caltrops, small iron devices with multiple spikes, were scattered to disable hooves, disrupt momentum, and create psychological fear among both horse and rider. These devices were simple in concept but highly effective, turning the raw power of a cavalry charge into a manageable threat. Polearms also played a critical role in anti-cavalry tactics. Weapons like the halberd or glaive, with long reach and reinforced tips, allowed infantry to strike upward at mounted knights, targeting vulnerable joints in armor or attempting to hook and pull riders from their saddles. Hooks and spikes on these polearms were deliberately designed to exploit the mechanics of mounted combat. Unbalancing a rider or trapping a weapon arm could decisively shift the outcome of a skirmish. Historical illustrations show disciplined lines of infantry holding bristling arrays of these weapons, creating impassable walls for charging cavalry. While these innovations were effective, they also highlight the broader medieval understanding of warfare. Combat was not always about brute force. It was strategic, often focused on exploiting weaknesses, controlling the battlefield, and neutralizing threats before they could reach devastating potential. A man-cather or a line of caltrops could be just as important as a knightly charge, and sometimes even more decisive, particularly when trained and disciplined soldiers applied them with precision. Anti-cavalry weapons also demonstrate the interplay between technology, psychology, and social context. Nobles on horseback were symbols of power, their presence inspiring both awe and fear. By devising tools that could unseat or trap such figures, armies undermined not just the physical threat, but also the morale of the enemy. The psychological impact of seeing comrades flung from horses by hidden stakes, hooked by polearms, or ensnared by a man-catcher cannot be overstated. Fear often spread faster than the physical effects of the weapon itself. It is worth noting that, despite their sophistication, these weapons required training and discipline. Improperly deployed caltrops or stakes could hinder friendly forces. Mishandled polearms could injure the wielder. Yet, in capable hands, they transformed the battlefield, balancing the scales against a seemingly insurmountable advantage. The ingenuity of these devices speaks to the medieval understanding of war as a science of both material and mind, where every design served multiple purposes: physical destruction, control, and psychological dominance. In the end, the Mancathar and its counterparts remind us that medieval warfare was as much about creativity as courage. Soldiers were not merely swinging swords or charging on horseback. They were engaged in a constant dialogue with the enemy, testing new methods, devising tools, and exploiting every possible advantage. These weapons, strange though they may appear to us now, were born of necessity, intellect, and the unforgiving realities of a battlefield dominated by armored men and charging steeds, crossbows. Silent, deadly, and controversial. Amid the clang of armor and the roar of charging knights, one weapon introduced a quieter, more insidious form of lethality: the crossbow. Unlike swords or polearms, the crossbow was designed for distance, precision, and the ability to strike from relative safety. Its projectiles could pierce armor, incapacitate knights, and change the course of battles, all while the wielder remained largely protected behind a shield or defensive line. Yet the crossbow was not merely a technical marvel. It was also the subject of moral and religious debate, earning a reputation that was both feared and condemned. The crossbow was a relatively simple machine in principle: a bow mounted horizontally on a stock, with a mechanism to hold the string in a drawn position. This allowed the user to draw back the string with a crank or lever, making it possible to store tremendous energy in the bow without requiring the physical strength needed to hold a longbow at full draw. A bolt, or quarrel, as it was called, could then be released with devastating effect, its small, heavy tip capable of piercing even well-made plate armor at close range. The mechanical advantage of the crossbow meant that relatively untrained soldiers could become lethal in a short period, a stark contrast to the longbow, which required years of training to master. The earliest crossbows appeared in Europe during the 11th and 12th centuries, though their roots trace back even further to China. By the 13th century, crossbows were common on European battlefields, employed by both infantry and specialized mercenaries. Chronicles of battles such as Hastings, 1066, and later encounters in France and Italy describe volleys of crossbow bolts raining down on advancing troops, their speed and armor-piercing capability causing fear and chaos. For medieval soldiers facing a sudden hail of bolts, the experience could be shocking and demoralizing, highlighting the crossbow's strategic value beyond simple lethality. Despite their effectiveness, crossbows were controversial. The Church, in particular, condemned their use in warfare. In 1139, the Second Lateran Council issued a ban on the use of crossbows against Christians, declaring them unfit for honorable combat. The reasoning was partly moral killing. At a distance without risking one's own life was seen as cowardly and partly social, as the weapon allowed common soldiers to defeat knights, undermining established hierarchies. Despite repeated denunciations, the practicality of the crossbow ensured its continued presence on European battlefields. Bans were largely ignored when survival depended on it. Crossbows varied widely in design: simple, One-handed versions allowed for mobility and rapid shooting, while heavier, two-handed or mounted crossbows could deliver powerful, armor-piercing bolts over greater distances. Specialized quarrels were often designed to maximize penetration, with broadheads for cutting or narrow, pointed tips for piercing mail and plate. In siege warfare, crossbows could pick off defenders atop walls or towers, providing a quiet, deadly counter to traditional archery or siege engines. Their relatively low noise compared to bows or catapults added a psychological advantage. An unseen enemy could strike without warning, eroding morale and spreading panic. The effectiveness of the crossbow lay not only in its mechanical design, but also in its tactical application. Armies learned to deploy them in concentrated units, protected by shields or fortifications, to maximize their impact. A line of crossbowmen could halt cavalry charges, support infantry, or dominate narrow passes and fortified points. Combined with other weapons, they became part of a balanced medieval arsenal, bridging the gap between long-range missile fire and close-quarters combat. In the end, the crossbow represents the intersection of technology, strategy, and human ingenuity. Its silent power reshaped medieval warfare, challenging the dominance of heavily armored knights and demonstrating that skill alone was not always decisive. It provoked moral debate, demanded tactical adaptation, and altered the balance of power on countless battlefields. For those caught beneath a volley of bolts, it was a weapon of deadly efficiency. For historians and chroniclers, it is a symbol of the quiet, calculated ingenuity that characterized medieval martial innovation. The longbow, the power of English archers. On the battlefields of medieval Europe, few weapons could command respect, fear, and admiration as profoundly as the English longbow. Towering nearly as tall as the men who wielded them, these formidable bows combined simplicity, strength, and precision to deadly effect. They were the instrument of choice for generations of English archers, whose skill and discipline repeatedly shaped the outcomes of major battles, from Crécy to Agincourt. Unlike the mechanical crossbow, the longbow demanded years of training and the development of near-superhuman strength, a requirement that would define both its users and their military culture. The construction of a longbow was deceptively straightforward. Typically made from yew wood, prized for its elasticity and durability, it consisted of a single solid stave, carefully shaped and smoothed to provide both tension and resilience. A bowstring of hemp or flax was drawn taut, capable of storing enormous energy. Arrows were usually made of ash or other lightweight wood, tipped with iron broadheads for slicing through unarmored troops, or bodkin points designed specifically to pierce chainmail and even the thinner areas of plate armor. The combination of design and materials allowed a longbow to launch arrows over impressive distances with lethal velocity. What distinguished the longbow above all else was the skill required to wield it effectively. Archers began training from a young age, often as part of a societal expectation in England that boys practice regularly to become competent marksmen. Drawing a longbow required tremendous upper body strength. A typical war bow could demand a draw weight of 100 to 180 pounds, far beyond what most modern archers are accustomed to. Accuracy, stamina, and speed were honed over years, allowing archers to release a rapid, sustained volley capable of overwhelming even heavily armored opponents. The strategic impact of the longbow was profound. In battles such as Crécy, 1346, and Poitiers, 1356, English archers decimated French cavalry. Positioned behind protective stakes, trenches, or fortifications, longbowmen could release a hail of arrows that tore through advancing knights before they could reach English lines. Even against armor, the bodkin point arrow could pierce vulnerable areas such as joints, armpits, and visors, delivering deadly injuries where conventional swords or maces might fail. The psychological effect was equally significant. A cloud of arrows descending upon troops could disrupt formations, instill panic, and force retreats before physical contact was made. Longbows were not merely battlefield tools, They shaped military organization and culture. English armies relied heavily on archers as a primary offensive force, rather than simply as support for infantry or cavalry. This emphasis influenced tactics, training regimens, and even the social structure, as archery skills became an expectation for many male subjects under royal law. The weapon's prominence also encouraged innovations in defensive strategies, including wooden stakes to impede cavalry and coordinated volley techniques to maximize lethality and coverage. Despite their advantages, longbows had limitations. Their size made them cumbersome in forests or confined spaces, and the strength required to draw them limited the number of capable archers. Environmental factors, such as wet weather, could weaken bowstrings or warp wooden staves. Additionally, longbowmen were vulnerable to flanking attacks or close combat if enemy forces managed to bypass their protective stakes. Nevertheless, the longbow's advantages range, rate of fire, armor penetration, and psychological impact far outweighed its drawbacks, making it a cornerstone of English medieval warfare for over 2 centuries. Beyond raw military utility, the longbow symbolized the fusion of discipline, skill, and strategic insight. Each arrow represented not just physical force, but the culmination of years of practice, training, and collective coordination. Massed volleys became instruments of both destruction and strategy, demonstrating that victory on the battlefield was not merely a product of individual heroism, but of preparation, ingenuity, and the disciplined application of force. The legacy of the longbow endures in both history and legend. It is remembered as a weapon that could humble the proudest knights, shape the course of wars, and redefine the balance between infantry and mounted forces. Its impact was measured not only in the lives it took, but in the evolution of military thought. It inspired, showing that, in the hands of skilled practitioners, even the simplest wooden bow could achieve remarkable, almost uncanny, mastery over the chaos of battle. Siege weapons, trebuchets, and catapults. Beyond the open fields where infantry clashed and knights charged, medieval warfare often unfolded on a different scale. The siege, castles, walled cities, and fortified towns dominated the landscape, their stone walls serving as both protection and a challenge to any would-be conqueror. To breach these formidable defenses, armies turned to siege weapons, machines of ingenuity and immense power. Among the most remarkable were the trebuchet and the catapult, devices that could hurl stones, incendiaries, or even diseased carcasses over walls, reducing the seemingly impregnable to rubble. The trebuchet, a marvel of mechanical engineering, relied on a counterweight to generate immense force. Unlike earlier torsion-based catapults, which used twisted ropes or sinew to store energy, the trebuchet employed a pivoting arm with a heavy counterweight at one end. When released, the arm swung with tremendous speed, launching a projectile from a sling at the opposite end. The physics of the machine allowed for remarkable accuracy and distance, enabling attackers to strike deep into fortifications or target specific defensive structures. A well-built trebuchet could hurl stones weighing several hundred pounds over hundreds of meters, smashing walls, gates, and towers alike. Trebuchets were not merely weapons of destruction. They were symbols of technological sophistication. Constructing one required skilled carpenters, engineers, and laborers, often working for weeks or months before a siege began. The process involved careful calculations of weight, arm length, sling dynamics, and projectile mass. Operators needed to coordinate teams to load, aim, and fire the weapon in rhythm, transforming raw mechanical power into a precise instrument of war. Chronicles from the 13th and 14th centuries describe these machines with awe, emphasizing both their destructive capability and the ingenuity required to operate them effectively. Catapults, while simpler than trebuchets, served complementary roles in sieges. Early catapults relied on tension or torsion to launch stones, darts, or incendiaries. They could target walls, enemy siege engines, or concentrations of troops, providing both direct and indirect fire support. While less powerful than a large trebuchet, catapults were quicker to construct, easier to transport, and more versatile in use. Together, these machines allowed besieging forces to exert relentless pressure, combining brute force, intimidation, and strategic disruption. One of the most fascinating aspects of medieval siege warfare was the use of psychological tactics in conjunction with these machines. Trebuchets and catapults could launch not only stones but also projectiles designed to terrorize defenders. Historical records describe corpses or even severed heads flung over walls, a grim warning to those within. In some cases, diseased animals or other biological hazards were hurled to spread sickness, demonstrating an early understanding of psychological and chemical warfare. The sight and sound of massive stones crashing into walls, accompanied by such grotesque projectiles, could erode morale even before defenders were physically overrun. Siege engines also required careful planning and adaptation to terrain. Soft ground could absorb the force of a trebuchet's swing, reducing accuracy, while muddy conditions could delay construction or limit movement. Attackers often needed to build platforms, trenches, or protective structures to ensure their machines functioned effectively. Defenders, in turn, developed countermeasures such as angled walls, hoardings, or mobile barricades to absorb or deflect projectiles. The interaction between offense and defense created a continuous cycle of innovation where each side's ingenuity was tested in practical, often brutal ways. Despite the fearsome power of these machines, sieges were rarely quick. They demanded patience, logistics, and careful coordination. A trebuchet or catapult could devastate walls, but armies still needed to exploit breaches, manage supply lines, and maintain morale over potentially months-long campaigns. The presence of these weapons, however, fundamentally altered the balance of power. Fortified positions that might have withstood a simple assault became vulnerable to sustained, mechanical bombardment, demonstrating the growing role of engineering and applied science in medieval conflict. In the end, trebuchets and catapults exemplify the ingenuity and technical sophistication of the medieval mind. They were not mere instruments of destruction, but carefully designed systems that combined mechanics, strategy, and psychology. Through them, one can trace the evolution of warfare from brute force to thoughtful calculation, where knowledge of physics, materials, and human behavior became as crucial as courage or martial skill. On a siege, every stone thrown was both a hammer against walls and a testament to the enduring creativity of those who waged war. Greek fire and other early incendiaries. In the shadowed harbors and fortified cities of medieval Europe, fire was not merely a tool of cooking or industry. It was a weapon of terror and destruction. Among the most feared and mysterious of these weapons was Greek fire, a substance capable of burning even on water, defying conventional extinguishing methods and leaving those who faced it in both awe and horror. Alongside Greek fire, medieval armies developed a variety of incendiaries, flammable liquids, burning projectiles, and primitive flamethrowers that transformed warfare into a contest of both strategy and fear. Greek fire first emerged in the 7th century under the Byzantine Empire, though the precise composition was a closely guarded secret, lost to history. Chroniclers describe it as a substance that could be projected from siphons or catapults onto enemy ships, igniting instantly and clinging to surfaces. Its ability to burn on water made it particularly devastating in naval engagements, where traditional dousing methods were ineffective. Sailors and soldiers confronted with Greek fire faced not only physical destruction, but also psychological terror. The flames seemed unnatural, unstoppable, and utterly consuming. By the medieval period, the concept of incendiary warfare had spread beyond the Byzantine Empire. European armies and defenders experimented with various combustible mixtures, often based on pitch, tar, sulfur, and oil. These substances were used to coat arrows, hurl projectiles from catapults, or pour over attacking forces. The aim was twofold: to cause physical harm and to induce fear. The sight of walls or ships engulfed in black, choking flames could demoralize defenders and attackers alike, shaping the psychological landscape of the battlefield. Incendiary weapons were also adapted to siege warfare. Boiling pitch or oil, heated in cauldrons atop walls or battlements, could be poured onto attackers attempting to scale fortifications. Though the popular image of boiling oil is often exaggerated, cauldrons of molten metal were rare. The principle was sound. Hot liquids, combined with gravity and surprise, could slow or stop an assault. Other siege engineers developed more sophisticated devices, such as fire pots launched from trebuchets or early flamethrowers, using bellows and siphons to spray burning liquids over enemy positions. These innovations demonstrate that medieval engineers understood not only the destructive power of fire, but also its capacity to control the battlefield. The effectiveness of incendiary weapons depended heavily on knowledge and timing. Fire spreads quickly under dry conditions, but can be extinguished or mitigated in rain or damp environments. Skilled operators needed to anticipate wind, humidity, and the arrangement of enemy defenses. The unpredictability of fire could turn it against one's own forces, making training, discipline, and careful planning essential. Yet, when employed effectively, fire became an extension of strategy, controlling enemy movement, shaping battle lines, and exploiting weaknesses in fortifications or morale. Psychology was as crucial as chemistry. The sight of Greek fire or burning projectiles was often enough to halt an advance, force retreat, or break formations. Stories of fleets destroyed by flames that leaped from ship to ship, or of attackers driven back by sudden bursts of burning oil, emphasize the dual nature of incendiaries. They were both physical and psychological weapons. Commanders who understood this could leverage relatively small quantities of flammable material to achieve outsized effects on the battlefield. Incendiary weapons also illustrate the medieval interplay between secrecy and innovation. Greek fire's exact formula was carefully guarded by Byzantine engineers, and similar mixtures developed in Europe were often closely held by individual lords or city-states. Knowledge of these substances and their deployment conferred a strategic advantage, and the fear they inspired often exceeded their actual destructive capability. In essence, Greek fire and other early incendiaries represent the ingenuity and daring of medieval warfare. They show that even in an age dominated by swords, axes, and armor, the elements themselves could be harnessed as weapons. Fire became a tool of both physical destruction and psychological domination, a reminder that the battlefield was not merely a contest of strength, but a space where creativity, engineering, and human fear intersected in the most elemental of ways. The boiling oil myth, truth and fiction. Among the most enduring images of medieval warfare is that of defenders atop a castle wall, pouring boiling oil onto attackers below. It is a scene of extreme brutality, often depicted in tapestries, films, and illustrations, yet historical evidence suggests that this dramatic tactic was far less common than popular imagination would have us believe. While defenders did use heated liquids, the use of oil specifically, particularly in the quantities portrayed in legend, is largely a myth, though it serves as a fascinating window into medieval defensive strategies and the psychology of war. The origins of the boiling oil story likely arise from the practical use of heated substances to repel attackers. Defenders routinely poured scalding water, molten pitch, tar, or even sand over assailants attempting to breach walls or ladders. These liquids were relatively easy to heat and deploy, available in abundance, and capable of inflicting serious injuries. Hot pitch or tar, for instance, would stick to skin and clothing, causing severe burns and panic, while sand could scald and obscure vision. Such methods were effective, low-cost, and required minimal specialized equipment. Oil, however, presents practical difficulties. Medieval lords and garrisons did not possess large reserves of cooking oil suitable for heating and pouring in bulk. Even if they did, heating and maintaining it in large cauldrons would have been slow, labor-intensive, and dangerous for defenders. The flammability of oil also posed significant risk, as accidental ignition could endanger the castle itself. For these reasons, historians generally agree that boiling oil was rarely, if ever, used in defensive warfare in the manner popular culture imagines. Despite its rarity, the myth persists, perhaps because it embodies the drama and terror of siege warfare. The image of molten liquid raining down on attackers is viscerally memorable and easy to visualize. In truth, defenders relied on a combination of more practical substances and mechanical methods: stones, arrows, crossbow bolts, and incendiary projectiles, such as firepots. These measures, combined with fortifications, narrow passageways, and traps, were often more effective than any scalding liquid could have been. The persistence of the myth also underscores the medieval interplay between reality and storytelling. Chronicles and epic poetry frequently amplified the horror of battle, emphasizing the ingenuity and ruthlessness of defenders. Tales of boiling oil may have been metaphorical or exaggerated accounts of pouring molten pitch or other heated liquids. These stories contributed to the reputation of fortified castles as nearly impregnable bastions, reinforcing social hierarchies and the awe associated with military engineers and garrison commanders. In practice, defenders focused on efficiency and safety. Heated water, pitch, or sand could be deployed quickly in cauldrons near wall edges or hoardings, targeting attackers on ladders or siege towers. The combination of height advantage, gravity, and concentrated heat made these substances terrifying and effective. Soldiers on the ground faced a cascade of obstacles. Not only the physical barrier of walls, but also a continuous onslaught from above, combining projectiles, scalding liquids, and the threat of melee combat once the walls were breached. The psychological effect was as important as the physical. Attackers could be routed before even reaching the parapets. Interestingly, the myth of boiling oil also illuminates broader medieval attitudes toward warfare. It reflects a fascination with the extremes of defensive ingenuity, the fine line between fear and practicality, and the way stories shaped perceptions of military power. While the actual historical use of oil may have been negligible, the enduring legend captures the imagination, conveying the intensity, danger, and cunning inherent in medieval siegecraft. In the end, the boiling oil story is less a record of battlefield practice than a symbol of medieval ingenuity, horror, and imagination. Defenders used a combination of heated liquids, mechanical traps, and projectiles to protect their fortifications, emphasizing efficiency and tactical advantage over spectacle. Yet the legend remains, a reminder that medieval warfare was as much about perception and psychological impact as it was about raw strength and skill. It is a testament to the ways in which the extraordinary can emerge from the practical, and how history and myth often intertwine in the stories we tell about the past. The caltrop and battlefield traps. On the chaotic expanse of a medieval battlefield, where knights thundered forward on horseback and infantry clashed with shields and swords, subtle weapons often proved as decisive as the most fearsome arms. Among these understated yet effective tools was the caltrop, a small, spiked device designed not to kill outright, but to hinder, injure, and disrupt enemy movements. Alongside other battlefield traps, caltrops exemplify the ingenuity of medieval armies, showing that success in combat often depended as much on strategy, preparation, and psychological manipulation as on sheer brute force. A caltrop was deceptively simple in design, typically a small metal spike or a tetrahedral assembly of 4 points, arranged so that when thrown on the ground, one spike always pointed upward. When scattered across the battlefield, these spikes could pierce the hooves of horses, the feet of soldiers, and even damage wagons or siege equipment. Unlike swords or axes, caltrops required no strength or skill to deploy effectively. Yet they could immobilize, slow, or demoralize entire units. Their effectiveness lay in their simplicity and the unpredictability of encountering them during a charge or advance. Historical records attest to their widespread use throughout Europe. In cavalry-dominated armies, caltrops served as a low-cost yet highly disruptive defense against mounted knights. Horses struck by spikes could be unhorsed, injured, or forced to hesitate, breaking the momentum of a charge. Even heavily armored knights, who might shrug off sword blows, were vulnerable to these hidden obstacles. Infantry could also fall victim, particularly when forced to move quickly under pressure or in tight formations, making caltrops a versatile tool for both offensive and defensive operations. Caltrops were often part of a broader network of battlefield traps. Spiked pits, wooden stakes, trenches, and concealed obstacles were employed to control movement, channel attackers into kill zones, or protect strategic positions. Castles and fortified towns frequently used similar devices. Narrow approaches could be littered with spikes and traps, slowing enemy advances and exposing attackers to defensive fire from walls. These preparations required careful planning and coordination, demonstrating that medieval warfare was as much about engineering and forethought as it was about courage and skill. The psychological impact of caltrops and traps cannot be overstated. Facing a hidden threat that could disable horses, break formations, or injure comrades induced caution, fear, and hesitation. The mental strain imposed by these devices amplified the physical disruption they caused. In many cases, a small number of strategically placed caltrops could achieve more than a direct engagement of forces, highlighting the medieval understanding that warfare was as much a contest of minds as of bodies. Caltrops were also portable and reusable, making them highly practical. Soldiers could carry them in bags, scatter them quickly during an engagement, and retrieve them afterward for future use. This adaptability added to their value, particularly for armies operating far from supply lines or facing repeated skirmishes. Their simplicity belied a sophisticated tactical understanding. The ability to slow, injure, and manipulate enemy movements with minimal resources reflected a profound grasp of battlefield dynamics. Despite their apparent subtlety, caltrops were not without risk. Improper deployment could injure friendly forces, and their small size made them difficult to detect and recover. Yet, experienced commanders incorporated them into broader strategies, combining these small devices with larger formations, ranged attacks, and heavier siege equipment to achieve maximum effect. The careful integration of caltrops and traps into a wider tactical plan exemplifies the medieval emphasis on preparation, ingenuity, and the clever use of resources. Ultimately, the caltrop and its kin reveal a fundamental truth about medieval warfare. Success depended not only on strength, courage, or skill, but on intelligence, foresight, and subtlety. Hidden spikes, pits, and obstacles could determine the outcome of a battle as effectively as the clash of swords or the charge of cavalry. These devices demonstrate that in the medieval imagination, the battlefield was not merely a site of brute force, but a canvas for human ingenuity, where cleverness and strategy could turn even the smallest object into a powerful weapon. The warhammer. Breaking armor. In the heat of medieval battle, where swords often glanced harmlessly off plate armor and maces required tremendous force to injure a well-protected knight, a weapon emerged that combined simplicity, precision, and devastating effectiveness. The warhammer. Unlike the sweeping arcs of a flail or the blunt strikes of a mace, the warhammer was designed for concentrated impact. Its primary purpose was to defeat armor, delivering bone-shattering blows to the limbs, torso, and head of heavily armored opponents. In both design and application, it exemplifies the medieval focus on practical innovation in the art of warfare. The warhammer's structure is deceptively straightforward: a long wooden shaft, reinforced with iron, supporting a metal head with one blunt side and often a spike or pick on the opposite face. The blunt side could crush armor, dent helmets, and incapacitate through concussive force, while the spike was designed to pierce joints, gaps, or plate seams. The dual functionality allowed the wielder to adapt mid-combat, striking with crushing weight or precise penetration depending on the target's defenses. This versatility made the warhammer particularly effective against knights and men-at-arms, whose armor often rendered conventional blades nearly useless. Historical sources and surviving examples demonstrate a variety of warhammer designs. Some were relatively short, one-handed weapons suited for infantry combat or use in tight spaces, such as castle corridors or urban skirmishes. Others were long, two-handed models, designed to generate maximum leverage and force, capable of delivering bone-crushing blows that could stun or disable even the most heavily armored adversary. In tournaments and training, soldiers practiced to perfect timing, accuracy, and control, understanding that a misjudged swing could leave the user off balance or vulnerable to counterattack. The Warhammer also evolved to include specialized features. Some had long, narrow spikes to exploit the weak points in plate armor, such as the visor, armpit, or behind the knee. Others incorporated hammer faces with fluted or ridged surfaces, intended to focus force on a smaller area and maximize impact. Certain designs even featured rotating or weighted heads to increase momentum. Every variation reflects careful observation of armor's vulnerabilities and the relentless pursuit of an advantage in combat. The weapon's effectiveness was not merely physical, but psychological. Facing an opponent wielding a warhammer could be terrifying, particularly when combined with disciplined infantry formations or strategic positioning. The sight of a heavily armored knight staggering beneath a single, well-placed blow reinforced the perception that armor, while protective, was not invulnerable. In this sense, the warhammer served as both a tool of destruction and a psychological weapon, challenging the confidence of knights who had long relied on the invincibility of their armor. Warhammers were also practical, particularly in the context of late medieval warfare, when the widespread adoption of full-plate armor limited the effectiveness of swords and axes. Infantry armed with warhammers could compete more effectively with mounted knights, leveling the playing field in ways that raw strength alone could not achieve. Commanders recognized this, incorporating warhammers into arsenals alongside polearms, maces, and ranged weapons to create balanced, adaptable forces. Training and technique were critical. A warhammer required careful handling to deliver maximum effect. Swinging too widely or too quickly could reduce force or leave the wielder vulnerable. Precise strikes, aimed at joints or weak points, were far more effective. Some manuals emphasize the importance of targeting knees, elbows, or the back of helmets, using leverage and momentum rather than brute strength alone. This calculated approach illustrates the medieval understanding of mechanics, anatomy. In the broader context of medieval warfare, the warhammer represents ingenuity driven by necessity. As armor evolved, so too did the weapons designed to counter it. Each spike, hammer face, and reinforced shaft was a response to a specific problem: how to defeat a foe otherwise protected from conventional attack. It demonstrates that medieval battle was not merely a contest of courage, but a continuous dialogue between offense and defense, adaptation and countermeasure, observation and invention. Ultimately, the warhammer stands as a testament to medieval practicality and innovation. It embodies a focus on precision, functionality, and effectiveness, a weapon designed not for flair, but for results. In the hands of a skilled soldier, it could turn the tide of combat, proving that even the most heavily armored adversary could be overcome with knowledge, strategy, and the judicious application of force. The man-catcher. Capture without killing. On the medieval battlefield, victory did not always come through death. In an age where ransoms for captured nobles could surpass the value of entire villages, the ability to subdue without killing was as strategically important as sheer force. Among the weapons designed for this purpose was the man-catcher, a polearm uniquely tailored to immobilize rather than maim. Strange to modern eyes, it reflects a medieval mindset that balanced violence with practicality, economics, and the intricate rules of honor and warfare. The man-catcher typically consisted of a long wooden shaft, capped with a metal head shaped like a pair of opposing semicircular jaws. The head was often reinforced with spikes or blunt edges to prevent escape, yet carefully designed so as not to crush or pierce flesh. The concept was simple: hook the torso or limbs of an enemy, ensnare them securely, and pull them off their horse or force them to the ground. Once captured, the prisoner could be restrained, ransomed, or interrogated. This made the man-catcher particularly valuable against mounted knights, whose speed and armor could otherwise render them nearly invulnerable to infantry. Historical evidence suggests that the man-catcher was primarily used in Europe during the late Middle Ages, especially in Germany and Italy. Manuscripts and illustrations depict knights and infantry wielding the weapon during skirmishes or urban combat, often targeting high-value enemies. Unlike weapons intended to kill indiscriminately, the man-catcher demanded precision, timing, and discipline. A poorly executed maneuver could allow the opponent to escape or, conversely, injure the wielder. Mastery of the weapon required both technical skill and careful judgment, emphasizing the nuanced approach to combat in medieval warfare. The man-catcher was not the only tool for controlled capture. Networks of nets, poles, and hooks were often employed in sieges or during ambushes to immobilize individuals or groups without resorting to lethal force. Cavalrymen, recognizing the value of prisoners, were sometimes ambushed and restrained rather than slain. In these instances, the battlefield became less a site of unbridled slaughter and more a stage for strategic calculation, where intelligence, patience, and the judicious application of force played pivotal roles. Its use was particularly notable in the context of ransom culture. Capturing a nobleman or a high-ranking officer could yield immense financial gain. Armies often preferred capture to death, carefully orchestrating tactics that could disable or ensnare their opponent while minimizing risk to themselves. The man-catcher, with its ability to secure a moving armored target, was perfectly suited to this purpose. It reflects the medieval intertwining of economic strategy and martial skill. Warfare was not merely a contest of violence, but a negotiation of value, risk, and reward. The weapon's design also illustrates the creativity and ingenuity of medieval engineers. The opposing jaws were calibrated to grip without crushing, often lined or beveled to prevent slipping. Some designs included mechanisms to adjust tension, allowing the user to tighten the hold gradually. The combination of leverage, timing, and anatomical knowledge made the man-catcher a highly specialized weapon, embodying both practical and intellectual sophistication. Psychologically, the man-catcher could be intimidating as well. The sight of an opponent being ensnared, hoisted from their horse, or restrained by a long pole without a single lethal strike created both awe and fear. Soldiers on both sides quickly learned to respect its reach and precision, understanding that capture could be as threatening as death. In urban or crowded battlefields, where confined spaces magnified the effectiveness of such weapons, the man-catcher could turn the tide of engagements in subtle but decisive ways. In the broader tapestry of medieval warfare, the man-catcher exemplifies a critical lesson. Victory was not solely measured by the bodies slain, but by the strategic use of force, control of the battlefield, and the careful exploitation of opportunity. It reminds us that ingenuity often flourished not only in the art of destruction, but also in the art of restraint. The man-catcher is a testament to the delicate balance between violence and calculation, a weapon that captures not just men, but the very logic and pragmatism of medieval combat. The horse collar and mounted combat innovations. In the vast sweep of medieval battlefields, the horse was more than a mode of transportation. It was a force multiplier, a platform for knights and cavalry that could turn the tide of war. The effectiveness of mounted combat, however, depended as much on engineering and training as on swords or lances. Among the most transformative innovations enabling cavalry dominance was the horse collar, a seemingly simple piece of equipment that revolutionized mounted warfare by improving control, power, and endurance. The horse collar consisted of a padded or rigid loop of leather and metal placed around a horse's shoulders, allowing it to pull heavy loads without choking or injury. While initially intended for agricultural use, this innovation had profound implications for military applications. By distributing weight evenly across the animal's body, the horse collar enabled knights and cavalry units to carry heavier armor, lances, and equipment without impeding the animal's movement or stamina. The increased efficiency allowed for longer campaigns, faster maneuvers, and greater endurance in sustained engagements, reshaping the tactical possibilities of mounted units. Mounted combat in the medieval period required precise coordination between rider and steed. Heavy armor, long lances, and the dynamics of charging formations placed tremendous stress on both horse and rider. Before the widespread adoption of the horse collar, draft harnesses, or throat and girth straps could constrict the horse's breathing or limit movement, reducing speed and stamina. By contrast, the horse collar freed the horse to exert its full strength while carrying or pulling, maximizing mobility and offensive potential. This simple adaptation turned cavalry units into devastatingly effective forces, capable of rapid strikes and decisive charges. The ripple effects of mounted innovations extended to battlefield strategy. Cavalry could now sustain longer engagements, maneuver more quickly, and execute complex tactics that required both speed and precision. Flanking movements, feigned retreats, and coordinated charges became more practical, altering the balance between infantry and mounted units. Battles such as Hastings in 1066 and later engagements during the 100 Years' War highlight how improvements in cavalry equipment, including the horse collar, allowed mounted forces to project power more effectively and maintain operational momentum over extended campaigns. In addition to the horse collar, other mounted innovations contributed to the evolution of cavalry warfare. The stirrup, though introduced centuries earlier, enabled riders to maintain balance while wielding heavy weapons, making lances and swords far more effective during charges. Saddles evolved to provide better support and stability, reducing fatigue and improving control over the horse. Armor for both rider and mount increased protection, allowing cavalry to engage in sustained combat without succumbing to enemy blows. Collectively, these innovations exemplify the medieval focus on integrating technology, training, and strategy to maximize the battlefield potential of mounted units. The psychological impact of mounted cavalry should not be underestimated. The sight of armored knights moving swiftly across the field with coordinated precision could intimidate and demoralize infantry. Horses equipped with improved harnesses and protective gear enabled charges that combined speed, mass, and weapon lethality, making cavalry not only a tactical advantage but a tool of psychological warfare. The knowledge that a disciplined cavalry unit could break formations or isolate key targets shaped both enemy planning and battlefield morale. These innovations also reflect the medieval understanding of human-animal collaboration in warfare. Success depended not only on the strength and skill of the rider, but also on the careful design of equipment that respected the horse's physiology and capabilities. The horse collar represents an elegant solution born from observation, experimentation, and necessity, demonstrating that even small technological advancements could profoundly influence the art of war. Ultimately, the horse collar and related mounted combat innovations illustrate how medieval armies combined engineering, biology, and strategy to reshape the battlefield. By maximizing the effectiveness of cavalry, these innovations allowed knights and mounted soldiers to dominate in both open-field engagements and sieges, transforming the dynamics of medieval warfare. They remind us that behind every charge, every maneuver, and every decisive strike lay a deep understanding of mechanics, anatomy, and the intricate interplay between rider and steed. The bardiche and other polearmodities. While the halberd and spear dominate discussions of medieval polearms, the battlefield also saw a variety of more unusual designs that reveal the creativity and adaptability of medieval weaponry. Among these, the bardiche stands out as a striking example. Known for its massive, curved blade affixed to a long wooden shaft, the bardiche combined elements of axe and polearm, creating a weapon both powerful and versatile. Its presence, along with other lesser-known polearmodities, underscores the ingenuity of medieval warriors in devising solutions to the challenges of armor, formation combat, and siege warfare. The bardiche's blade was large, often broader than a conventional axe, and sometimes curved in a crescent shape. Unlike a halberd, which typically included a spike and hook in addition to its axe-like edge, the bardiche emphasized cleaving power. Its long shaft, often reaching 5 to 6 feet in length, allowed infantry to engage mounted opponents or pierce defensive lines while maintaining distance. Some designs featured reinforced collars where the blade joined the shaft, preventing breakage under repeated heavy blows. In battle, a bardish could deliver devastating strikes capable of breaking helmets, denting armor, or cleaving shields in half. Unlike more common polearms, the bardiche was particularly suited for infantry fighting in open formations or during siege operations. Soldiers could use it to chop through wooden fortifications, doors, or barricades, making it a dual-purpose weapon of offense and utility. Its size and weight required significant strength and training to wield effectively, yet a disciplined soldier could unleash continuous, punishing blows that demoralized opponents and disrupted formations. The weapon's sheer reach and force rendered it a formidable tool, even against armored cavalry, particularly when employed in conjunction with stakes, caltrops, or other defensive measures. Other polearm oddities, often localized to specific regions or time periods, reveal the experimental nature of medieval arms development. The spontoon, a shorter polearm with a tapered blade, was intended for both thrusting and slashing, offering versatility in close combat. The volge, with a broad, cleaver-like blade, served similar purposes to the bardiche, but was lighter and more maneuverable. The lucerne hammer, combining hammer, spike, and axe elements, provided both concussive and piercing capability. These weapons illustrate a period of intensive innovation, where designers and soldiers adapted existing concepts to meet the diverse challenges of medieval warfare. Many of these unusual polearms also reflect tactical and social considerations. Some were designed for mass infantry formations, where long reach and varied striking surfaces could compensate for lack of mobility or armor. Others were crafted for specialized roles, siege assault, anti-cavalry defense, or urban combat, demonstrating the medieval understanding that different contexts required different solutions. The diversity of polearm forms indicates a sophisticated approach to warfare, where adaptation and creativity were as valued as raw strength or courage. The bardiche and its contemporaries also highlight the interplay between material availability and design. Oak, ash, and other strong hardwoods formed the shafts, while iron or steel provided durable, resilient blades. Weapon makers experimented with mounting techniques, reinforcement methods, and blade shapes to maximize effectiveness and reduce failure under stress. These innovations, though subtle, could determine the difference between victory and disaster in the chaos of battle. Psychologically, these weapons carried a formidable presence. The sight of a line of infantry wielding bardishes or lucerne hammers, their blades gleaming and poised, could intimidate both mounted knights and unarmored conscripts. Even when not striking, the imposing length and unusual shape conveyed both reach and lethality, shaping enemy perceptions before combat had even begun. In essence, the bardiche and other polearm oddities exemplify the ingenuity and adaptability of medieval warfare. They demonstrate that innovation was not limited to siege engines or ranged weapons. Even seemingly simple tools like the polearm were subject to experimentation, refinement, and strategic thought. These weapons remind us that medieval soldiers and engineers continually sought to maximize effectiveness, blending strength, creativity, and tactical insight to master the art of combat. The flail, chain and ball complexity. Among the more visually striking and psychologically intimidating weapons of medieval warfare, the flail occupies a unique position. Consisting of a wooden handle connected by a chain to a spiked or weighted ball, the flail embodies a blend of simplicity and ingenuity. While often romanticized or exaggerated in modern depictions, historical examples and accounts reveal that the flail was a practical, if challenging, weapon that required skill, timing, and discipline to wield effectively on the battlefield. The flail's design leveraged momentum and unpredictability. The flexible connection between handle and striking head allowed the user to generate rotational force, enabling blows that could circumvent shields, parry defenses, or strike around obstacles. This made it especially effective against opponents with heavy armor, where conventional weapons might glance harmlessly off polished steel. A well-aimed swing could deliver concussive force capable of stunning, injuring, or disorienting a combatant, creating openings for follow-up attacks from the wielder or accompanying soldiers. Historical records suggest that flails were more common in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly in regions like Germany and Poland, though variations appeared elsewhere. Some were relatively short and single-headed, suitable for one-handed use in confined spaces or urban combat. Others were larger, two-handed weapons, designed to maximize reach and impact against heavily armored foes in open-field engagements. The balance between length, weight, and flexibility was critical. Too heavy, and the weapon became unwieldy. Too light, and it lacked sufficient power to challenge armored opponents. Despite their effectiveness, flails were not without challenges. The very flexibility that made them difficult to block also made them difficult to control. A misjudged swing could strike a nearby ally, become entangled, or leave the user vulnerable to counterattack. Training was therefore essential. Manuals and chronicles emphasize careful practice to master timing, distance, and rhythm, ensuring that the weapon's unpredictability could be harnessed rather than becoming a liability. In this sense, the flail represents a fusion of brute force and skill, demanding both physical strength and calculated precision. Beyond battlefield utility, the flail also had symbolic and psychological impact. The sight of a warrior swinging a chain-linked weapon with lethal potential could unnerve opponents, breaking their composure even before engagement. Its unfamiliar motion and the sound of metal striking armor contributed to a sense of chaos and danger. In some cases, the flail's intimidating presence may have been as strategically valuable as its physical capabilities, demonstrating the medieval understanding of psychological factors in warfare. Flails also illustrate the medieval tendency toward hybridization in weapon design. Many combined elements of traditional striking weapons with features intended to overcome specific challenges. A flail's spiked head could pierce armor, while its swinging motion circumvented shields, merging blunt and piercing functions into a single implement. Similarly, variations with multiple heads, chains, or reinforced connections sought to enhance lethality and adaptability, showing a continuous process of experimentation and refinement. Importantly, the flail was part of a broader ecosystem of weapons designed to counter the increasing sophistication of armor. As plate and mail became more effective, medieval engineers and warriors sought tools capable of exploiting weaknesses, targeting joints, or delivering concussive force. The flail, with its flexible, unpredictable strike pattern, met this need, complementing other weapons such as warhammers, polearms, and maces. Its presence on the battlefield reflects a nuanced understanding of combat mechanics, anatomy, and armor technology. Ultimately, the flail demonstrates that medieval warfare was as much about creativity and adaptation as it was about brute strength. It challenges modern assumptions that chain and ball weapons were primarily theatrical or ceremonial, revealing instead a practical, technically sophisticated solution to the problem of armored combat. In the hands of a skilled soldier, the flail was a formidable tool, capable of breaking defenses, controlling the pace of combat, and projecting both physical and psychological force. The war scythe and agricultural weapons turned deadly. In the crucible of medieval conflict, necessity often gave rise to creativity. For peasants, militia, and irregular forces, traditional battlefield weapons such as swords, spears, or axes were not always available. Instead, everyday agricultural tools were adapted into instruments of war, transforming implements of labor into deadly weapons. Among these, the war scythe stands out, a familiar farming tool modified for combat, emblematic of both resourcefulness and the brutal realities of medieval warfare. The war scythe was derived from the standard scythe used to harvest crops, but with a critical modification. The blade was turned perpendicular to the shaft, creating a long, curved cutting edge, ideal for sweeping strikes. This orientation transformed the scythe from a harvesting implement into a formidable polearm. In skilled hands, it could slash at enemy formations, hook shields, and target unprotected limbs. Its long reach and curved blade allowed infantry to threaten mounted knights, disrupt spear walls, and engage in close combat with unexpected efficiency. Historical accounts show that war scythes were especially prominent in peasant uprisings and militias. Lacking access to traditional arms, groups like the Hussite forces in 15th century Bohemia effectively utilized modified agricultural tools to challenge professional armies. These weapons allowed irregular troops to maintain distance, leverage group formations, and deliver devastating strikes despite limited training. The psychological effect was significant. Organized ranks of peasants wielding war scythes could inspire fear and hesitation among seasoned soldiers, demonstrating the tactical potential of ingenuity over conventional armament. The transformation of agricultural tools into weapons extended beyond the scythe. Pitchforks, flails, sickles, and even spades were repurposed for combat. Many of these implements shared common advantages. They were readily available, relatively easy to adapt, and often longer than the average sword, providing reach and leverage. Modifications, such as reinforcing wooden shafts, sharpening edges, or adding metal fittings further enhanced their effectiveness. In this way, the medieval battlefield became a landscape where everyday objects were converted into deadly extensions of human ingenuity. The use of agricultural weapons also reflects the intersection of social structure and warfare. Professional armies relied on standardized weaponry, armor, and training, while peasant forces had to improvise, turning what was at hand into a competitive advantage. The war scythe embodies this adaptive spirit, showing that resource constraints could drive creativity, and that understanding leverage, momentum, and reach could compensate for a lack of conventional martial skill. In addition to practical considerations, these weapons had psychological and symbolic impact. The sight of an irregular force wielding familiar tools as lethal weapons could unsettle professional soldiers, introducing uncertainty and disrupting morale. This dynamic illustrates that medieval warfare was as much about perception and intimidation as it was about physical force. The war scythe, therefore, was not merely a weapon of necessity. It was a statement, demonstrating both the ingenuity and the resilience of those who wielded it. Training with agricultural weapons often focused on formations and coordinated strikes. While individuals could cause injury with a single swing, the true power emerged when used in disciplined ranks. Synchronized motions could break through lines, hook opponents, or neutralize cavalry charges. These techniques required strategic insight and practice, revealing that even improvised weapons demanded skill and tactical understanding to be effective in battle. Ultimately, the war scythe and other agricultural weapons illustrate a fundamental truth about medieval warfare. Survival and effectiveness often depended on creativity, adaptation, and resourcefulness. Weapons were not solely defined by their design, but by the minds and hands that wielded them. From farm fields to battlefields, the repurposing of everyday tools into instruments of war underscores the ingenuity, practicality, and relentless determination that shaped medieval combat. The guisarme and polearm hybrids. Among the most intriguing developments in medieval weaponry are the polearm hybrids, long-handled weapons that combined features of axes, hooks, spikes, and blades. Chief among these was the guisarme, a weapon that exemplified both creativity and practicality, designed to counter mounted knights, fortified positions, and disciplined infantry formations. The guisarme and similar hybrids reveal how medieval soldiers sought to adapt tools to multiple roles, blending lethality, reach, and versatility into a single implement. The guisarme typically consisted of a long wooden shaft ranging from 6 to 8 feet with a curved, hooked blade mounted on one end. Some designs included additional spikes or hammer-like surfaces, enabling both slashing and thrusting. The hook itself was its defining feature. Soldiers could use it to pull riders from horses, catch shields, trap weapons, or hook limbs to unbalance opponents. Unlike simpler polearms, such as spears or pikes, the guisarme offered a range of tactical options, making it suitable for both offensive and defensive engagements. The weapon's origin can be traced to 12th century Europe, though its widespread use extended through the 14th and 15th centuries. Its versatility made it a favorite among infantry tasked with countering cavalry charges or storming fortified positions. Knights, while heavily armored and formidable in direct combat, were vulnerable to the guisarme's ability to manipulate both horse and rider. Hooking a lance or shield, or yanking a mounted opponent off balance could neutralize their mobility advantage and turn the tide of skirmishes. The guisarme's design reflects the medieval emphasis on multifunctionality. In addition to engaging mounted foes, it could pierce armor with spikes, cleave unprotected limbs, or leverage enemy weapons in hand-to-hand combat. Some variants incorporated hammerheads or spike points on the opposite side of the blade, allowing a single weapon to perform the roles of a warhammer, poleaxe, and hook simultaneously. This adaptability reduced the need for soldiers to carry multiple weapons, making formations more efficient and responsive. Similar hybrid polearms emerged alongside the guisarme, each reflecting regional preferences and tactical requirements. The Volge, for example, featured a broad cleaver-like blade suited for chopping and thrusting, while the Bec de Corbin incorporated a hammer and spike for piercing armor. Other designs, such as the Fauchard or Partisan, emphasized extended reach with blade modifications for slashing or thrusting. These weapons demonstrate the medieval willingness to experiment, blending design elements to solve specific battlefield challenges. Training with hybrid polearms was critical, as their complexity demanded coordination, strength, and precise control. Soldiers needed to judge distance accurately, strike with the correct angle, and maintain formation discipline. A misjudged swing could leave the wielder off balance or exposed, particularly against fast-moving cavalry or multiple opponents. Manuals and treatises of the period emphasized these principles, illustrating a sophisticated understanding of mechanics, leverage, and battlefield dynamics. Psychologically, the guisarme and its kin exerted influence before combat even began. The sight of a line of infantry wielding long, spiked, hooked weapons could intimidate mounted knights, disrupt enemy morale, and channel attackers into predictable paths. The weapon's reach, versatility, and unusual shape created both awe and fear, demonstrating that effective warfare relied not only on physical capability, but on perception and the manipulation of human behavior. Ultimately, the guisarme and other polearm hybrids exemplify the inventive spirit of medieval warfare. They reveal a culture of adaptation, where soldiers and engineers respond to evolving threats, armor, cavalry, and fortified positions by merging functionality, efficiency, and creativity. These weapons were not mere curiosities. They were practical, specialized tools that could decisively shape the outcome of engagements, turning both ingenuity and skill into tangible battlefield advantage. Medieval throwing weapons, from javelins to hand axes. In the orchestration of medieval warfare, ranged combat was not solely the domain of bows and crossbows. Soldiers and warriors employed an array of throwing weapons, simple yet effective tools capable of shaping engagements before hand-to-hand combat even began. From javelins to hand axes, these weapons were integral to both skirmishes and large-scale battles, demonstrating the medieval understanding of range, trajectory, and battlefield psychology. Javelins were among the most straightforward of these tools. Essentially light spears designed for throwing, they could be deployed en masse to disrupt formations, weaken enemy lines, or unhorse-mounted opponents. Infantry trained in their use could launch volleys that forced cavalry to slow their charge or scatter, while opposing infantry faced the risk of piercing injuries that could incapacitate key soldiers. Javelins offered several tactical advantages. They were portable, reusable, and could be carried alongside other weapons, providing flexibility to troops in the field. Hand axes, while primarily melee weapons, were frequently adapted for throwing. The design of many axes included balanced heads and grips that allowed them to spin predictably in flight, striking with both force and precision. Like javelins, hand axes were effective at short to medium range, capable of wounding opponents, breaking shields, or creating openings for subsequent attacks. Unlike arrows or bolts, they did not require specialized infrastructure, such as a bow or crossbow, making them accessible to soldiers of varying skill levels. The use of throwing weapons extended to more specialized forms as well. Lead weights, stones, and small metal projectiles could be hurled from the hands or catapults to harass enemy troops. In sieges, defenders frequently deployed pots of stones, molten pitch, or small incendiary devices to strike attackers approaching walls or ladders. These improvised projectiles, though lacking the elegance of a bow, capitalized on range, weight, and the principles of gravity to produce tactical effects, demonstrating that medieval combat relied on both ingenuity and adaptation. Throwing weapons also required skill and practice. A soldier needed to judge distance, trajectory, and timing to maximize effectiveness, particularly against moving targets. In the case of mounted opponents, precision was critical. A javelin or hand axe had to strike at a vulnerable point, whether horse, rider, or armor seam. Misjudged throws could leave the user exposed or expend valuable resources without impact. Training ensured that throwing weapons were not merely supplemental tools, but purposeful instruments capable of shaping the battlefield before engagement escalated. Psychologically, the effect of thrown weapons should not be underestimated. A volley of javelins or axes could disrupt enemy formations, create hesitation, and lower morale before physical contact occurred. The unpredictable nature of projectiles added to the chaos, forcing soldiers to divide attention between offense, defense, and evasion. In some cases, the fear induced by projectiles could accomplish what swords and lances might struggle to achieve: the disruption and disorientation of enemy units, turning disorder into opportunity for coordinated attacks. Throwing weapons also illustrate a practical understanding of resource management in warfare. They were inexpensive to produce, easy to transport, and reusable, allowing armies to maintain pressure on enemies without over-reliance on specialized or costly armaments. Their accessibility made them a democratizing element of medieval combat, empowering infantry, militias, and even levied peasants to influence outcomes alongside heavily armored knights. Ultimately, javelins, hand axes, and other thrown implements highlight the nuanced complexity of medieval warfare. They were more than simple extensions of the arm. They were tactical instruments, psychologically influential, and economically practical. Through the careful application of range, trajectory, and timing, soldiers could manipulate the flow of battle, soften resistance, and create openings for decisive action. In this way, throwing weapons exemplify the medieval synthesis of skill, ingenuity, and adaptability, revealing a dimension of combat where intellect and preparation could equal, or even surpass, brute strength. Strange siege weapons. From springalds to giant crossbows. When the goal of warfare shifted from open field engagements to the formidable task of breaching fortifications, ingenuity became paramount. Siege warfare demanded weapons that could project force over walls, penetrate defenses, or strike at defenders from a distance. Among the most unusual and mechanically complex of these were springalds and giant crossbow siege engines, designed not only for destruction but for precision, adaptability, and psychological impact. The springald, emerging in the 12th and 13th centuries, was a torsion-powered device resembling a giant, upright crossbow. Unlike standard crossbows, which could be operated by a single soldier, springalds relied on coiled ropes or twisted sinews to store immense tension. These torsion springs were carefully calibrated to hurl bolts weighing several kilograms across distances exceeding 200 meters. Operated from elevated positions on walls or towers, springalds provided defenders with the ability to strike attackers at range, particularly those attempting to scale walls or assault gates. Their mechanical sophistication made them both feared and revered, as few weapons could combine power, accuracy, and range in such a compact form. Giant crossbows, similarly, were scaled-up versions of handheld crossbows, designed to launch massive bolts or quarrels. Some could only be operated with mechanical aids, such as windlasses, winches, or treadles, reflecting the medieval understanding of leverage and energy storage. These weapons were deployed to penetrate heavy armor, destroy siege engines, or target concentrated enemy formations. Their imposing size and the noise of operation often had as much psychological effect as the physical damage they caused, projecting both authority and terror across the battlefield. The construction of these siege weapons demanded skilled artisans, engineers, and laborers. Torsion springs for springolds required careful selection of materials, hemp, sinew, or animal hide, twisted to precise specifications. The arms and frames had to withstand tremendous stress without failure, while mechanisms for drawing, loading, and releasing bolts had to function reliably under pressure. Giant crossbows required similar attention to wood selection, reinforcing techniques, and metal fittings to ensure that energy transfer did not compromise accuracy or safety. Every component reflected an intricate understanding of mechanics, materials science, and practical engineering in a period often perceived as technologically primitive. Springolds and giant crossbows were not merely physical instruments. They were psychological tools. The sight of massive bolts being loosed from walls could unsettle attackers, while the destructive capability of such weapons demonstrated the futility of frontal assaults on well-defended positions. Chronicles describe bolts capable of striking multiple enemies or destroying siege ladders in a single shot, underscoring both the practical and symbolic power of these engines. The very presence of such weapons influenced tactics, often forcing attackers to adapt, delay, or reconsider direct assault strategies. These weapons also illustrate the medieval integration of mobility and defensive architecture. Springolds, though large, were sometimes mounted on wheeled platforms or adjustable bases, allowing them to be repositioned to cover different sections of a fortification. Similarly, giant crossbows could be aimed over walls or through narrow openings, combining the advantages of range with the protection of defensive structures. Their deployment demonstrates that medieval engineers recognized the importance of flexibility, positioning, and calculated control in siege scenarios. Ultimately, springolds and giant crossbows exemplify the medieval mastery of adaptation and applied science in warfare. They were not mere curiosities or symbols of martial extravagance. They were practical, effective tools that combined mechanics, strategy, and psychology to defend or dominate the battlefield. These engines remind us that medieval warfare was a realm of continuous innovation, where the interplay of engineering, ingenuity, and human skill could achieve feats as impressive and terrifying as any charge of cavalry or clash of infantry. As we reach the end of our journey, one thing becomes clear. The strange weapons of medieval warfare were more than tools of violence. From warhammers and man-catchers to springolds and improvised war scythes, each represents ingenuity, adaptability, and tactical thought. They reveal a period where survival, strategy, and psychology were as important as brute strength. These weapons were often born of necessity, designed to pierce armor, disrupt formations, or capture enemies without killing. Some inspired terror, others demanded skill, and many combined multiple functions into a single implementation. Even everyday tools became deadly when adapted for combat, showing that resourcefulness could rival professional training in shaping the battlefield. Ultimately, medieval weaponry reflects a deep understanding of human behavior, mechanics, and the art of war. They were extensions of both mind and body, demonstrating that ingenuity was as decisive as courage. In imagining the hiss of Greek fire, the flash of a spinning flail, or the crash of a springled bolt, we glimpse a world where strangeness and creativity defined the very nature of conflict. These weapons were more than instruments of destruction. They were expressions of human innovation in extreme circumstances, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire.